you have any
Awesome.
question, Candice, before we start, or anything to mention?
Yeah, I'm pretty all right. I think we'll let you do the presentation, and then whatever questions come up, because I've already asked around and nobody specified any questions.
Perfect.
So yeah, you take it away.
Okay, wonderful. And by the way, if you have any question for me during the presentation, you can write it in the chat, and Candice will monitor the chat, so either she can stop me or we can save it for the end. So welcome everyone, and let's talk about cognitive load a little bit. So the first thing I need to talk about is a little bit how our human brain works. Because when we're talking about very good user experiences or successful product, that doesn't mean that starts with really pretty images or great feature. What it really starts with is people. And to be able to create this really beautiful user experience for people, we definitely need to understand how people think, how people make decisions, and how people can choose to buy your product versus somebody else's product. So there have been obviously many decades of study about the human brain. But as far as design is concerned, I think that the contribution of Daniel Kahneman is probably one of the most important. Daniel Kahneman is an Israeli-American psychologist and economist, which is notable for his work on how people make judgment and how people make decisions, as well as behavioral economics, meaning how the human behavior is actually driven in economic field. And in fact, he won a Nobel Prize for economic science because of his work. Probably one of his most famous books is Thinking Fast and Slow. And in this book, he talks about how our brain is divided in two separate systems. So what he calls system 1 and system 2. So system 1 is basically your intuition, your instinct, anything you do unconsciously, any decision you make really fast, automatic, association you create. And according to Daniel Kahneman, and I have to say I agree, this part of our brain, the system, is actually in charge about 95% of the time. So even though for years and years and years, scientists believe that humans are very rational, they're always going to do a cost analysis, right, before making a decision, Daniel Kahneman actually mentioned that and showed that this is really not true. And this is not a bad thing, because system 2, or rational thinking, takes a lot of effort, is very slow, is very logical, but also very indecisive. And because we have very limited resources, is somewhat lazy in the best possible way. So it's trying to save energy. So imagine that every time you have to make a decision, you have to weigh the pros and cons. That would be impossible, because we're faced with thousands and thousands and thousands of decisions every day. So it wouldn't be possible, which is why system 1 is usually in control about 95% of the time, and system 2, or rational thinking, is in control for about 5% of the time. So now keep in mind that even when we're talking about rational thinking, the system 1 is also intervening. So it's never like pure rational thinking. Intuition, instinct, emotion, they still have a very big part in the interaction. So now, using system 2 is hard work. If you remember, every time you really have to think about a really important problem or even a purchase decision, it's a hard work. And this is why, as I mentioned, human brain trying to evolve to use the least amount of effort. So that's why he tried to work smarter and not harder. And it does that by using something called mental shortcuts. So basically kind of rule of thumbs that your brain uses to be able to make quick decisions. One of those mental shortcuts is called mental models. So what are mental models? Mental models is basically ideas that you have about the world, about yourself, about your environment, any kind of concept you have, maybe even preconceived notion you have how things should work. And this is done so that we can understand the world. So imagine that, you had to relearn things every single time. It will take a very long time. So that means that, for example, if I go to a building where I've never been before, I'm probably going to see doors that I've never seen before. However, I know how to use a door because I used tons and tons of doors before. So I don't have to relearn how to open a door. Another thing you can consider when you're thinking about mental model is that mental model are created with experience, life experience or learned experience, as well as your own intuition, which means the mental models that each one of us have are not necessarily the same and are not necessarily correct because they're based on experience. So, but just to display these differences, imagine that you have to explain someone how to drive a car. Now, if you live in United States, like I do, most of the cars are automatic. So an automatic gear works that instead of having number gears, like 1, 2, 3, 4, there's actually letter gears, and they're very basic. There is drive, there is park, there is reverse. So basically, to make a car go, all you need to do is just press the accelerator, make sure your car is in drive, and it basically will do all the work. If you live in Europe, especially in Italy, where I'm originally from, you don't use automatic car, you use manual car, which means that to actually make the car go, you had to press the clutch and you had to shift gears. Now, if I'm used to this kind of car, my mental model is going to be very different from the mental model of somebody that only lives in the United States and they only understand how automatic cars work. So now, that doesn't mean that my mental model is better or your mental model is better. It's just different, which is why it's so important when you design to talk to your customer, because you need to understand what their mental model is. You're not your customer, you don't know. So by talking to them, you can actually have an idea about, okay, what do they expect? How do they expect things to work? The other thing that System 2 is really good at is make sure that attention is selective. That means when you're focusing on a task, a really important task, you will ignore everything else if it's not related to the task. And again, this is a wonderful thing because all of us work in a noisy environment, and wherever you are, there is always a million things going on. So right now, you're probably focusing on the screen or whatever else you're doing. You're not paying attention to a dog barking in the distance or to somebody like cutting their trees or something like that. So this is why it's so important our attention is selective, so we can focus on what really matters to us. There's a couple of other things about attention that is really important to understand. The first thing is that it's goal-oriented. So why we decide to pay attention to something versus something else? Well, because we all have some specific goal. And I'm not talking about high level goals like, oh, I want to lose weight next year. I'm talking about something very specific, like I have to buy, whatever, a present for Christmas. So I need to focus my attention on anything to help me achieve that goal. So we only pay attention to what matters for us. Now, this purpose, this idea about attention will be also guided by vision. So even though we have goals, we can easily be distracted, and our vision will constantly go back and forth trying to figure it out, what information is relevant for us and what information is not relevant for us. Also, attention is very short term. We are easily distracted by external or even internal stimuli. In fact, some studies said that you cannot maintain sustained attention for more than about 10 minutes. So before you get distracted, you can very quickly bring it back, but usually you get distracted easily. And one other thing about attention being selective is that when you're really focusing on something, you will ignore anything else, even if it's really, really, really obvious. So I'm sure it happened to all of you guys that when you're trying to find something, you're not going to see it, even if it's in front of your face. And this is not because you're blind, like I usually tell my son, but because you're focused on something, and therefore you may miss things that are really, really obvious for you. So there are a lot of experience about that. And it's really interesting to, when you realize that, and it's really fun to notice that you're not different from anybody else. You have a selective attention. Now, for example, right now, you're probably not even listening to me and you're focusing on this really adorable puppy. Because how can you not? And I'm a cat person, but this puppy is adorable, right? So I can easily hijack your attention, both as a designer, as a regular person. But fortunately, your memory, short-term or long-term, can bring it back. And you remember, oh yeah, you know, this is an adorable puppy, but I was actually listening to a presentation about cognitive load. And so you can easily come back to what you were doing before. So the goal as a designer is to not only capture attention, which is really, really important, but also to keep it. So you would have to make sure your customer are paying attention to you, but also you want to make sure they're not getting distracted. So how can you do that in a design sense? Well, the first way to attract attention is when you have a good contrast. So when something is brighter than other, or smaller or bigger, so any kind of contrast is really helpful to attract attention. Other things that can attract attention is like surprises and delighter. We're always looking for change. So if you ever notice like an Easter egg or something hidden in a interface that all of a sudden become obvious, we really like it. And we definitely paying attention. So friendly language is another thing that can help you pay attention, especially it's personalized. So you will notice a lot of successful websites using the word you quite a bit instead of we, just to make it more personable, more fun. And then of course, humor. Anytime you can make somebody chuckle is definitely, and laugh is definitely a really, really good idea, because then you will attract their attention. No matter how bad the humor is, you're still gonna pay attention. And now that you have the attention, how can you hold it? Well, there is a couple of things you can do to avoid distraction. The first thing is reduce motion. Don't use motion unless it's really necessary and unless it's really enhancing the user experience. Because our eyes has been trained to pay attention to anything that moves, which makes sense from an evolution standpoint, because obviously when we were in the early days of humans, you need to know if a tiger is coming up and like ready to eat you. So we're really sensitive to motion, even in our peripheral vision. So even if we're not trying to pay attention, we will be distracted. So trying to avoid things like, you know, a scrolling ticker, for example, or really fast sliders that go really fast, because that will definitely distract. The other thing that can be a big distraction is when your interface is really cluttered, because then you don't really know what to look for, and therefore you're going to constantly scan to trying to figure it out. Okay, which one is the most important thing? Which means that you should only have one single focus, meaning don't have a lot of call to action in the same page. Just focus on what's really important and trying to make sure to attract attention to it so that I can stay there. And having a good hierarchy is also a really important thing, because a good hierarchy will draw my eye to follow a specific structure. And we are trained to see structure in anything we look at. So that's definitely really helpful. This is one example of a website that I think it does a really good job in attracting your attention and holding it. This company is called Grow Collaborative, and is a company that offers subscription for products for cleaning your house, as well-being and baby and kids and pets. It's a really great company for a lot of reasons, but they also do a really good job with their website. Obviously, I'm logged in, but the first thing I see as soon as I get to the page is a friendly greeting. Hello, Tiziana. So it made me feel like I know who you are. Obviously, I'm logged in, but it's still really, really nice to have such a friendly greeting as soon as I get there. Also, it tells me exactly what's going to happen. When was my last order? When was the next order? And if you look up here, it tells me that, hey, by the way, there is a 35% off on a specific product. That's a nice surprise, and it's definitely delightful, because 35% off is a pretty good discount. There's great contrast. So as you can see, it's very obvious to be drawn, not only just, sorry. See, I want to go back to the puppy. So not only to my name, but also a very big contrast between all the different elements. I can see the picture right away. There is a lot of negative space. And of course, the language is really friendly. And then the way they maintain my attention is because the hierarchy is really important. So I can see the most important thing is the greeting. The second most important thing I notice is the sale, because the picture obviously attract attention. And so I'm reading that, hey, there is a 35% off of, of this particular products. There is no animation that is gratuitous, and it's very simple and uncluttered. And in fact, since we're talking about animation, one thing the site does exceptionally well is to use animation in the right way. So every time you click add to add a product to the cart, first of all, you see a little animation that brings the item back to the cart and add the number. But the other cool thing about it, and this goes back to surprises and delighters, is when I click on the button, even instead of just keeping add or becoming, impossible to click again, it will make a comment like, oh, that's such a great idea, or great product, or great choice. So it doesn't stay for a long time, but it's definitely something you don't expect. And trust me, I buy online a lot. And I want to say that most of the time when you buy things, they just simply add to the cart and move on. So the fact that you actually give me the little surprise is definitely something that keep my attention there. And by the way, not only they change the text, they also change the color of the button, so that we're very attuned to see differences. So I immediately notice a change of color, and that drive me to read the cute message that they put on the button. So really, really nice, nice way to do that. Now, we talked about memory, how memory help us lead attention. And so you need to understand that there are different types of memory. So there is memory that's sensory, so that means is driven by our perception. And this particular memory, in fact, some people don't even consider a memory because it's such a short-lived. It basically records any changes in our environment through our senses. So it will store sensation, is sense specific. So your vision will store specific sensation. Your hands will, show, say, particular sensation. And then it will, if it's really important, it will pass it on to one of either the working memory or long-term memory. It's interesting to see that, again, we are very sensitive to change. So if you ever held a really warm cup of coffee, you know that after a few seconds, you don't feel the heat anymore. You just get used to it because your hand, sensory memory say like, okay, we know that it's warm. We don't need to remember anymore. Let's see, there's something else important. Working memory is the second type of memory. And working memory is what used to be called short-term memory. The reason it's been changed the name to working memory is because it actually does some work. It's not just a temporary storage. It's very focused, it's very volatile. That means it doesn't last long, but it also store all the resources you need to make your, all the resources you need to work and achieve your goal. And of course, long-term memory is what we usually consider memory when we're talking about it. So it's a long-term storage, but it's also error-prone and unreliable. Why would that be unreliable if it's a long-term storage? Well, because a lot of time we think about our memory as a big organized warehouse. So we think about, okay, there is one, there is, every time there is a memory, I will store it very neatly on a shelf and it's going to be ready for me to be retrieved. In reality, our memory looks a lot more like this. So there is a bunch of stuff everywhere, and there is no order to it. And maybe when I need something, I need to look for it and maybe combine different pieces to make it come back. So our long-term memory is actually every time you think about something, you don't just replay it like a movie. You're actually trying to rebuild that connection, your neural connection that you had when the memory was created. That means every time you think about something or you remember something, you remember slightly differently. Because again, you're putting the pieces back together. So this is important to understand because that means you can rely on your customer memory to remember what parts of where things are or what the menu's saying. And you also have to know that there are 3 different flavors of long-term memory, and some of them you can actually affect. So the first type of memory is semantic. That means all the memory you learned. So everything you learn in school that you still remember, everything that you learn by experience, this is a learned memory. As a web designer, you can help your customer to create some semantic memory just by being very consistent on where you put your different elements, how your website works, so that customer will be used to and will learn how to use your website. There is also episodic memory, which we have very little control over it, because that's what you consider memories, right? That records, or you're going to remember things that happen to you. Positive experience, negative experience, which means it's very important to make sure your customer don't have a negative experience, because they will remember for a long time. And finally is procedural. That means anything that you learned a long time ago and now is autopilot. So to go back to the example of a car, you learned probably to drive a long time ago, and then you're gonna be remembering how to drive very automatically. Or you learn how to go to work, what route to go to work, you don't have to remember every time, you would automatically go in there. So if you make your website very consistent, maybe you can create some procedural memory in your customer, so they will do things automatically. So how do we get back to that memory? How do we retrieve, since it's not a nice, beautiful warehouse, it's a messy garage, how can we bring back our memories? Well, there are 2 different ways in which you can bring back memory. One is called recognition, the other one is recall. Now, recognition is a lot easier because it's almost an automatic how-to memory. So that means some kind of input, can be a sensory, can be a visual, can be a sound, trigger a somewhat related memory. And when I talk about somewhat related, that means they have to have one thing in common, which can be a really small thing. Recall, on the other hand, when you're making a conscious effort to remember something. So for example, you have an exam, you had to study for your exam, your recall, meaning trying to remember all that information that you crammed in the night before the exam. So just to show you kind of how recognition works. So I was driving down the street not too long ago in the freeway here in the United States, and there was a small car that was turquoise blue. Now, I don't remember which car it was exactly, but I do remember it was a very bright turquoise blue, which is very rare, at least in the United States. You don't see a lot of those cars. So just like I mentioned before, my eyes and my attention were drawn to it because it's unusual. So when I looked at it, though, a memory immediately popped in my head. And the memory that popped in my head, it was of a boombox. Now, not to age myself, but you use those to listen to cassette tapes. So when I was little, I really, really wanted a boombox for Christmas. I asked my parents, and I really wanted, and I finally got it. But one thing about this boombox was specific, it was a bright turquoise blue. So again, this is probably not exactly the model I have, but what happened as I saw that car, an image of the boombox immediately popped in my head. It's something I haven't thought about in like, I don't know how many years. It's not something you think about it all the time, but that turquoise blue immediately brought a connection to my blue boombox. So again, it seems they're not related at all, but the color creates the tie between the 2. And this is what I mean for recognition. Now, once the boombox popped in my head, I'm trying to remember what year it was. Then I got this boombox. Now, sometime in the 80s, but when was it? Was 83, was 87, was 82? I have no idea. So this is what recall looks like. So recognition, it wasn't automatically pop in my head, but recall is trying to remember when that present happened. And I can tell you I completely failed because I have no idea what year it was. So that's why it's so much easier to have a recognition. So recognition is really easy. Recall is really hard, which is why when you're designing your interfaces, you shouldn't force your customer to recall something. So that means you should have, for example, your navigation menu visible every single time. Don't hide it, especially on a larger screen, behind a menu, like a little icon, like a hamburger button, we call it here, the 3 different lines. Don't hide it, because that expect that you expect that your customer will remember that A, that's a menu, and 2, they actually wanted to go and look what's in there. They remember there is something they were looking for is right there. So having it in front, just open, is a lot easier for somebody to remember and also to explore. Because if you see like 5 or 6 links that will take you different pages of your website, it's more likely that you will suggest, oh yeah, maybe that's really interesting, I should go check it out. Versus if it's hidden, you're probably never gonna get to that discovery. So this is why you want to make sure you make it very easy for your customer to do that. So with all this said, what is cognitive load? Well, and why we should worry about it? Well, the goal about not having your user think is that you want to reduce this cognitive load. So cognitive load is the total amount of information that your working memory can actually handle. So all the resources, your mental effort that is required to complete a task. And I'm talking a task that's not automatic. I'm talking a task that actually require a little bit of effort. So again, you're trying to, for example, you're trying to wrap a present. So you have to put some effort into it. You have, first of all, you have to find out and remember where the wrapping paper is, what the ribbons are. You have to cut the paper, make sure it's nice and straight. You have to do all those things. And this is your mental effort, your cognitive load. Now, there's nothing wrong with cognitive load. We have cognitive load all the time. The only problem is that cognitive load remind us that our brain resources are limited. Now, the word cognitive load came from the cognitive load theory that was originally done by John Sweller, an Australian educational psychologist. We actually was trying to find ways to help students retain information better. So the idea of the cognitive load nutshell is that the brain can only do so many things at once. And so when we asking somebody to do something, we should be very intentional and don't ask for too much all at once, because otherwise you will lead to overflow, right? So there are 2 things that can make cognitive load worse. Number 1, what is called intrinsic load. And this is really not too much you can do about it. This is like the inherent difficulty of a task and the necessary energy to learn and complete it. So think about any kind of subject you learn, something that was a little bit difficult for you. For me, it's math. I'm not the best person at math. So no matter how easily it's explained to me, there is an intrinsic difficulty of math, for me at least. So math is difficult. So no matter how easily you're trying to explain it to me, it's still, there is some difficulty to it. So as designer, there is really not too much we can do about it. We can just try to make it look easier, but there is some difficulties you cannot eliminate. Extraneous load, on the other hand, is anything that takes up mental resources to deal with other things that have nothing to do with the task at hand. So that could be distractions. That could be things that we can't control, like a little child asking for a question while you're trying to complete a job. But there are also a lot of things we can do as designer to eliminate at least visual distraction, so that your customer, your user, can actually focus on the task at hand without being overly taxed. So one other thing that can increase cognitive load is your emotions. Now, a lot of time we feel, again, we're not very emotional people, we're very rational, but regardless, emotion is really ruling most of the decision we're making and most of the thing we do. Now, positive effects, which means positive emotion, those are really, really important, because when you feel good and you have a positive feeling, your brain hemisphere, the 2 parts of your brain, talk to each other a lot more, which means you can come up with really creative, ideas and very innovative problem solving. You can overcome obstacles. You can even enter a state of flow, which you may have heard of, but basically is that you're so focused and happy in the process that the goal almost doesn't matter. You just enjoy the process of doing a particular task. interesting enough, doesn't take too long or too much to induce positive effects. A picture of a puppy, for example, will be enough, unless you hate puppies, will be enough to actually bring some positive emotion. And doesn't have to be, you know, they did a lot of studies about it, that looking at happy picture, for example, can actually have a measurable effect in performance. So if you ever feel stressed out, try to look at picture of puppies or cats or kittens or whatever make you smile, because that will be enough to give you some positive experiences. On the other hand, if you have negative effects, or you're stressed or you're frustrated, what happens is your brain is really focused. There is no space for creativity. You're very, very focused on what you're trying to do. In fact, overly narrow focus. So while this can, a little bit of stress can be good when you have to prepare for an exam, you have to perform, those kind of things are good because you're focused on what you're doing. When it gets to be too bad or too much, or you get too frustrated, you notice that it's really hard to do even simple things. Even things you always done without any problem, when you're frustrated or stressed out, is going to be very difficult. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I know that when I'm in the rush, I'm stressed out, I will drop things, I forget what things are, I would even have trouble doing the most mundane things. And this is because my brain is so focused with negative emotion that I can't really make good decisions. So obviously, when you're designing a website, you want it to cause positive emotions. You don't want to cause negative emotion, because that would increase the negative feeling, and therefore will make it harder for your customer to do a good choice. So, and this has happened, when this has happened, is because you go in overload, what is called cognitive overload. And that means that your brain does not have enough resources to deal with everything that's being thrown at it. So that means also that frustration will grow exponentially. So it's not going to go slowly up, it's just going to shoot up, and it's going to be worse and worse and worse. So how can we not do that? Or what causes overload? Well, you may be surprised, but visual complexity would actually increase the cognitive load. We're used to find patterns, and when something is really visually complex, it's very difficult for us to recognize those patterns, and once it takes more resources. Now, if you look at those two computers, they are pretty much from the same time, but one is a regular Power Mac from the late 90s, sorry, and the other one is an iMac. So you may remember, or you may have seen the design of the iMac. That was one of the first all-in-one computer, instead of having a monitor and a large box. So even though the iMac came after the first on the slab, so it probably was actually, you know, more complex to use, it looks easier because visually it looks easier. And if we continue in this trend, if you look at the original iMac, or the candy color one, and the new iMac looks simpler because it's streamlined, the design is really clean, it's a flat screen. So again, even though the new iMac probably can do a lot more complicated things and is a lot more complex than the original iMac, it looks easier, and therefore it makes you feel like the tasks are actually easier. So why should you care? I mean, obviously you care about your customer, but why is that so important? Well, because when the cognitive load is excessive, when your customer is in overload, it will be causing much more bounce rate. That means it will go to your website and then leave without doing any kind of purchase. They may even spend a lot of time on your website, but they will try to figure it out what they want, and they're not going to be able, and so they're going to leave without making a purchase. There is also a decrease of conversion, meaning you want them to sign up for your newsletter or for things like that, but they're not going to be able to do that. They will feel overwhelmed, which means that they're not going to come back to your website. It's too confusing, it's too stressful, they're not going to come back. Excuse me. And then they're also going to be unable to do timely decision. They're not going to be able to choose, yes, that's what I want to do. And it will make them tired and impulsive. You probably know that when you're tired, you're not going to make the best decision, which is why sometimes people say you shouldn't make important decisions at nighttime when you had the whole day to deal with, especially after a bad day. because you're too tired to make good decision, you may be impulsive. But probably, I'm sorry, you have a question?
No, I was just saying it.
Yes. So, but probably the most important reason why you should matter is trust. The more overwhelmed your customer are, the less gonna trust you. And as you know, you don't do business with company you don't trust. Trust is essential to create a connection and to persuade visitor to answer your call to action. If I don't trust a website and I feel that I don't know if I can believe that they're gonna actually take good care of my money and my data, I'm not gonna do business with them. So, and incredibly enough, the better design and more clean interfaces actually inspire trust more than cluttering and overwhelming interfaces. In fact, beautiful websites perform better. In fact, beautiful things in general perform better than things that are cluttered or not well designed. And the reason for this is that we trust them. We think they're easier because they look easier. And therefore, we are in a better effect, positive effect, and we work harder to make sure it works. Because your first impression is that something is easy. You don't want to be wrong, right? You don't want to think like, oh, it looks easy, but in reality, it's really complicated. So you work extra hard to make sure that the vision in your mind matches what actually the reality is. So very, very important that you inspire this trust. So poor design will increase the cognitive load. Unfortunately, this site called Applause Learning Resources is still alive. In fact, if you go and Google it, you'll find that it looks exactly like this. So, which is really sad because I had to use it to buy some books for my son who was learning Italian. So, and it was a painful experience. The reason being that there are so many steps to even get to where you want to go. So you will click like shop, whatever, let's say Italian books. Then it will give you different types of books. Then from there, you have to choose another type of book until you finally find what you want. Now, of course, I could use the search bar, but it's really even hard to see there is a search bar. It's like hiding all the way to the top. There is definitely overstimulation. There are tons of color, tons of button, way too many options as far as navigation is concerned. There are two different types of navigation, one on top, one on the side. It's really difficult to find pages and features, internal inconsistently design-wise. And I'm not even talking about the horrible colors combination that you can see here, because, you know, maybe just me. But all the other things is pretty obvious. And I'm sure you feel the same way. And if you want to enjoy this experience, feel free to go to Applause Learning Resources and experience on your own to see how much fun it is. Now, one other thing I want to point out is that not only there is tons of content, but it's very ambiguous. So if you look at those buttons in the middle, notice there is shop Italian, Spanish, French, German, Latin. Then there is shop teacher resources. Okay. But then you have Italian online catalog. How is that different from Shop Italian? Is that the same? What is the difference? So not only there's too much, it's also very, very confusing. Interesting enough, they're celebrating 30 years of customer, and honestly, it looks like this website was designed 30 years ago and never changed. So you know, that will be kind of actually an interesting exercise if you want to practice what you learned today on take this picture, this website, and trying to make it better and make it more easy to understand. And honestly, if I look at this, it just gives me anxiety just by looking at it. Now, this is maybe an extreme case, but you're probably familiar with an interface like this. If you're using Windows 10, this is what your desktop is going to look like. Now, obviously, you can simplify, you can delete boxes or add boxes, but by default, there are tons of stuff in this interface. And when I look at it, I don't even know where to start. I probably would notice Netflix first, just because it is red and black and is one of the first things that attract my attention. All those blue boxes on the left side, I don't know what they are. I have no idea. Now, as you can probably tell, this is not my actual desktop. My desktop is way simplified because I eliminated pretty much all the boxes. But this is exactly what it looks like. So you don't want to do this because I don't even know where to start. So how do you know if your design is overwhelming? How do you know? Well, some of the question your user may ask if your design is too overwhelming is, where's the home button? Is that a link? Should I click on this? What will happen if I make an error? How do I save this? Is this an ad or is it a button? What should I do next? What happened to my data if I refresh it or I leave and come back? Now, granted, you're not in your user head to listen for these questions, but you're probably going to have a very good idea of if those questions are actually answered. And if you don't, just have a nice usability test with your actual customer and make sure you see their difficulties if there are any. So, but those are very easy questions you can ask yourself and trying to figure it out. Maybe ask your significant others or your friends that they're not involved with the design if they finding what they're looking for easy or difficult. So what can we do? What can we do to help? Well, there's a lot of things you can do. So the first thing you can do, you want to keep it very simple. So when you design an interface, simpler is better. So this is the website for a snack company called Kind. He creates mainly nutritional snacks and bars. So you have no question about what to do. There is a big blue box to say how our new gifting line has just dropped. And that's pretty easy. And there is one call to action, shop now. Now, granted, it's a shopping site, but it's still way too many companies are not that focused. Also, the navigation is pretty simple, have only a few elements. Sure, shop and about us probably have a sub menu, but it's pretty easy. And then at the bottom, you have another way to navigate. So instead of just having a text navigation for people that are more visual, they will have explore our snacks. And not only to tell you all snacks, nut bar, breakfast bar, they're also going to have a picture so that you can understand exactly what they're talking about. And you can see what kind of product you're going to get if you click on any of those. Also, they're showing you with the arrows that you can actually navigate left or right to see more products. And in case you don't see the arrow, there are 3 dots that tells you, hey, there are 3 screens of options. So you can go from one to the next. And obviously beautiful typography and a lot of negative space help to keep this interface simple. Now, this is again, my favorite Growth Collaborative. And it does exactly the same thing. It's very simple. There is a lot of negative space. It tells you exactly what's about, using very nice typography that's very easy to read. But even more importantly, it uses conventions. So, you know, the shopping cart is a pretty much universal way to indicate that's a checkout. The circle with the numbers, even if it's green in this case and not red, is pretty obvious. That shows like, hey, by the way, there are 15 items in your cart, right? Also, we all used to see a box that say email address. We know exactly what that is. We know that our cart or login area usually is on the top right, and the navigation is usually either in the center or in the top left, which I strongly recommend you if you're designing for a Western public to avoid using the top right for putting your navigation. Because most people are so used to see things they're not as crucial, like login and cart or whatever that is, that they will not find your navigation there. They will not even look at it because they're thinking that there's really nothing important there. And I don't know how many sites I see that have the main navigation on the top right, which is definitely making it harder for their customer to actually find it. Another thing you want to consider is to be consistent. So this is, and this is a perfect example, as I was telling you, is that probably you should avoid navigation to the right. However, because there's nothing else on this screen, it may still be visible. I still would have moved it, but at least it's the only thing floating in the screen. So Pandora, in case you're not familiar with it, is working a little bit like Spotify. So you can listen, you can buy a premium plan, or you can start listening for free. And you just enter, find artists, song, podcast, and so on, and start playing. Now, their interface for their mobile design is exactly the same. There is no question you're on the same side. They use the same icon. And also they use convention. When you have a thumbs up and thumbs out, when you have a pause and play, those are very common symbols that we are all used to. So there is no question about what are we looking at. Another thing you want to do is to make intuitive. I really like Yumly. This is a site that will give you specialized and personalized recipes. So the fact that they're personalized is already really nice, because then you get only recipe that you like. But even nicer is when you create your personalization, you can start out by saying, okay, is there any ingredient you don't want? Because I know that there's a lot of recipes sometimes that look delicious, but then they have tons of ingredients that either I can't eat or I don't like to eat. And not only they help me do that, they also have a little drawing, just in case you don't know what avocado means. So that makes it really, really intuitive. The only gripe I have with this site, I would say that I am intolerant to garlic, and garlic is not one of the ingredients that you can eliminate. However, it's easy enough not to put it in when you read the recipe. But other than that, I think it's pretty nice, the way they make it intuitive. Obviously, on the left side, there is a navigation, which is also pretty intuitive. Sign up or log in. There is my feed. There is meal planner. So you don't have any content, any question about it. And just in case you don't like, oh yeah, here we go. Just in case you don't like recommendations, they are particularly specifically tailored to you. You can also say don't personalize. And you can, I just noticed that, but you can add other ingredient to exclude. So if those ones is not something you care about, you can actually add more ingredients and say, no, don't show me anything. I was kind of surprised to see why would people don't want bananas in their food, but
I was surprised how you could say you wouldn't want garlic.
I know. Everybody asked me that. Interesting enough, nobody really knows that, but in California, every food is done with tons of alcohol, garlic. So, and not only they're using garlic, they don't cook it, and they use garlic salt, which is concentrated. And so I never really liked garlic as much when I lived in Italy, but I wasn't intolerant until I moved here. So after moving here and living here for a little bit, now I cannot eat it at all. Well, I never had a problem like this in Italy. And the Northern Italian cuisine does not have a lot of garlic, which is another thing most people don't know. And they also cook it. You don't very rarely eat raw garlic like you do it here. And so I think I just read my limit. But I get that question every time I say I'm Italian. I say I'm intolerant to garlic. I was like, what? You're Italian. You should not be intolerant to garlic. So, and it, funny enough, I met 2 other people from Northern Italy like me that became intolerant to garlic here in California. So it's not just me. It's just they're going overboard. So, but yes, sorry. No. Another thing that, I still like about the site, remember we were talking about recognition versus recall. That is so much easier to recognize. So by asking me what's my favorite cuisine, instead of just asking me put words in it, they just give me an idea like, okay, I like German, and you have a picture of what I think is like Wuster, seem like. Moroccan, you give me a kebab. Irish, you show me some kind of potato things. Japanese, they show me sushi. Cuban, they show me, I would say, chicken and rice. Hawaiian. So they give you also an image, not just, okay, Cuban. They're just like, hey, see, this is an example of what Cuban cuisine will be. And by the way, if you ever have the chance to eat Cuban pastry, don't pass it up. They're incredible. They're so good. So it's very, very easy. I don't have to remember, oh, what is like Moroccan again? I can see it just right there. right? Making it very, very nice. And he also, by the way, it reminds me, why do I want to be in this site? Because he said that I can search more than 2 million recipes. That's a lot of recipe. And notice, by the way, that even though I'm highlighting this for the recognition versus recall, notice how all those other rules I mentioned before follow here. It's very simple, it's very obvious, it's very clean, there's a lot of negative space, there is no confusion, no clutter. So even though each site has some particular thing I want to point out, they all following pretty much the same rules. Now, this, on the other hand, is not necessarily the same. I don't know if you're familiar with Slack, but Slack is a application that allow you to do kind of instant messaging with your group. So it's kind of taking the place of like email, if you will. It's much more instantaneous. But one thing I like about it is that our memory is very limited. And so one great thing that Slack does, it lets you log in just with your email. And then you can add what they call workspaces, so groups, and you can do that just with your email. And when you enter your email, all the workspaces you signed up with before will show up just with your email, which is great. Instead of having a password for each one of them, the email is enough to show you everything you join with that particular email. And it leave you obviously signed in, which is another really great thing to do. So I don't remember which site I took that login is, but I'm sure you've seen it a million times. There is a box to say, remember me. So as long as it works, that's really great, because that means that you don't have to log in to it. Unfortunately, a lot of time what happens is you click remember me and they don't remember you. And that's kind of doing the opposite. Instead of being happy that, hey, great, you remember me so I don't have to enter my password again, you get even more frustrated because it feels like they're joking. I'm like, oh yeah, you asked me to remember me, but then you don't. So what's the point, right? But if you are able, think about your phone. Most of the application you have your phone, maybe not your bank app, but most of the application you have your phone, probably they'll keep you logged in. And there is a good reason for it, so you don't have to remember a million things. Now, you can obviously use also password software that will remember all your password for you. Most browser would allow you to save password. So all of those things are really helpful because our memory is limited. And honestly, I would rather use my memory to remember important stuff instead of 5 million passwords. So that's why it's really, really helpful. One other thing you can do, make it really, really clear. This is the homepage for Vimeo. I'm assuming you're familiar with it, but if it's not, it's like a video application, kind of like YouTube, where you can upload video. It's a little more on the serious side, I would say, but they have a free plan and pay plan. But even if you never met Vimeo, you don't know what Vimeo is, it simply tells you create videos in minutes. So it's pretty obvious what they do, right? And then you have join for free and see plans. Now, I wonder if you can tell which button do they want me to press. So obviously, see plans is a little more obvious and brighter and colorful than join for free, because they definitely trying to convince me that I should see their plans. I don't think this is particularly unethical, but it's definitely a little bit manipulative because Vimeo knows that a bright color would help you get people clicking it. But they definitely making clear what they're doing. And if you scroll down the page a little bit, even make it even more clear by telling you, okay, why would you create videos? What would the purpose of video? And say, hey, you can do video marketing, you can have employee communication, you can also monetize video, maybe in this case by doing yoga classes. So it's very, very obvious. In fact, a lot of time I recommend young designer or designer that learning UX, that there is a wonderful test to do either yourself or with your customer, is that something called the 5-second test, in which you show an interface design for 5 seconds, literally, and then you take it away and you ask the person looking at it if they can, what can they remember, and even more importantly, can't you tell who is the company and what they do and what they want you to do. Those are the 3 most important things that you should be able to tell in 5 seconds. The name of the company, what do they do, and what they want me to do. Because at the end, when people go to a website, they're asking exactly those 3 questions. What is this? What are the benefits for me? And what should I do? So if you cannot tell in 5 seconds, maybe it's time to redesign it so that you can. Because I don't know how long you wait when you see a website before going somewhere else, but I'm very close to 5 seconds. My time is important and precious, probably yours too. So within 5 seconds, I should be able to see, yes, that's the place I want to be. No, it's not the place I want to be. And I have to say, Vimeo really succeeded this test, because if you look at this for less than 5 seconds, you immediately know what's about. And he does that with simplicity, only a couple buttons, and obviously really, really big contrast. You have white over black, which is always one of the best contrasts. In fact, no matter what people say, white over black text over white background is probably the best contrast you could ever have. And the second best is black on yellow, apparently, which is why most of the alert signs and those kind of things are usually black text over yellow, a yellow background, at least here in the United States. I'm not sure how it is in Europe, but I think
I have a question for you.
Yes, please.
So yeah, I think just before I forget this one, but a research that I recently read about actually demonstrated that there was more strain on the eye for users using dark mode.
Right.
So while it is a high contrast that draws attention, it does also have a cognizant load to it.
Correct. Yeah, no, that's totally true. Because no, it's true. Because while you have text on white is the absolutely best contrast, black background with white text is a lot harder to read. Now, in this case, there is only like 1 line, so it's not, and big text, so it's not a problem. But the problem with dark mode is that the text usually is pretty small. And when you have small text that is in contrasty color with black, your eyes have to strain a lot more to actually read it. So despite what everybody says about dark mode, I personally don't like it because I do feel the extra strain. Maybe I'm not 20 anymore, but still, I found it very difficult. And again, it is being proven by study that it takes longer. Now, if you absolutely have to do that and you had to have reverse text, there's a couple of things you want to do if you had to have a dark mode. Number 1, increase the size and the thickness of the text and add a little more space between lines, because that will help the readability. And especially don't do what Apple does. If you go to the apple.com site, at least in United States, they're using a light gray over black, which is with very small text. So they make it really difficult to read for no reason whatsoever, because they could totally do white over black instead of, light gray. So you definitely want to make sure it's visible, and ask people that are over 20. Because younger people obviously have a better vision, but your website is not necessarily going to have only 20 years old. If it is, then you can do whatever you want. But in general, you have to consider the vision gets worse, even with people with perfect visions. So it gets worse with time. So you want to make sure you make it easy to everyone. So, but yeah, that's a great point, Candace. So black over white is a lot better than the other way around it. So if you can do that. And another interesting thing about cognitive load is that I just recently did, they recently did a study about students, and they noticed that student learns and retain a lot more when their textbooks are actually printed instead of digital. And this is for a variety of reasons. One is harder to read on screen. And this is for everybody, young and old. It just, your eyes get tired. Even if you have the blue light blockers or anything like that, it's just harder to read online. And 2, because we are trained not to actually read online. We skim through. And that goes for everything, including textbooks. So you don't actually read line by line, you just kind of skim through, and therefore you retain less information. So if you want to learn something really well, I recommend to buy an actual printed book. I don't get any kickback for printing companies, but I really, really recommend it just because it is a lot easier. It's a lot easier to learn and retain with a printed book. So maybe I'm old-fashioned. So,
No,
but check out those two side by side. This is the same company. The one on the right, it was up till, I would say, 2018 versus the one on the left, it's just being redesigned in 2019. And notice what a huge difference that redesign makes. So the one on the right, the one till 2018, you will notice that does everything I told you not to do. There's going to be way too much content, not enough negative space, it's confusing. There is no idea where to start, where to end. There are multiple navigation on top and on the bottom. There is not enough space around the text. The image is kind of squished in with the logo. It's hard to see exactly what they want you to do. I have no idea what they are. The only thing that is better in the older one is that you actually know what MAC-O means. So because it's the Montana Association of Counties, which I have no idea what that is. I guess is an association for counties in Montana. But that's the only thing. So, but at least their tagline in the new one is say we are MAC-O and we are the voice of Montana, 56 counties. So you kind of have an idea of what it is. So definitely this, but notice just by making the image bigger and they have the text a lot bigger, they have easy button. And then as you pass in the bottom part, notice that he broke it down as resources and data, your trusted services, events. So they kind of combine some of the navigation, but they also gave it a lot more space. So that is easy. It also they add a little icon, which even though they may not be super clear, even though I think those are pretty clear, they attract attention a lot more. We're way more drawn to visuals than we are to text, which makes sense. And in fact, this is why logos are so powerful, because people remember them immediately. In fact, I had a personal experience on that when my son was 2, I believe, about 2. So he could barely talk, but he could recognize logos. And it was amazing to me how like he would see them once and he will immediately recognize them. It was just crazy. He could recognize the brand of his little toy cars. They were like in the bottom of the car, black on black. He could immediately recognize the brand. He knew all the car brands, almost more than he does now, which is to me blew me away, because I know how powerful logos are, but to see a 2 or 3-year-old recognize logo without being able to read or anything, to me was like a perfect explanation of why visual are so much more important than text, because we are drawn to picture. If you think about it, the alphabet came way past after the paintings on the cave. So there must be a reason, right? We are definitely more visual than, we can actually learn. In fact, reading is a learned skills. It's not something you're born with, versus most kids will start doing some things. I wouldn't call it drawings, but they will take a crayon and start doing things when they're really little. They're not going to just start writing the alphabet. So obviously we are very, very much more drawn. There is only one thing I will say I don't like of the new redesign, and that's a very easy fix, is the contrast between the light blue and the white color. So the contrast is very, very poor, and it will make it very difficult to read. So in this particular case, what I would do, I would either get a darker blue, or, because I am assuming that they want to differentiate those two buttons, change the color of the text. The text could have been a dark blue. One thing I noticed too with my students a lot is they think that you can either have black or white in their text, in their buttons. And they don't consider that it doesn't have to be black. It could be a darker color, which could be blue. or it doesn't have to be white. It could be like a really pale pink, or it could be a really pale yellow. So that's one thing I found really interesting in, young designers, is that they only have two options in their mind, only white or black.
Yeah.
Versus there is so many other options that you can use that it will work. And again, in this case, a color, a dark blue will be perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be black. Excuse me. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's easy not to think about it.
Yeah.
So
I think that this company does seem to have a challenge with color, because
yes.
on the old interface as well, you can see the colors are not
Oh, yeah.
balanced.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that is extra load on the brain, right?
Right. Yeah. Like dark, there are two things in the old one that's not very, there are many things, they're not good. But one thing is, that's another thing, another mistake I see a lot of young designers do. They wanted to have text over pictures. And that makes the text really difficult to read. So if you look on the right side where it say feature content, that background, it doesn't add anything because I cannot even tell what it is. It just make the text harder to read. So if you want to have an image and text, my recommendation is always to break down the box. So you have one area with the picture, one area with the text, because it's very difficult to find the perfect balance of that image and text on top, especially when image have different tones, like darker and lighter, like in this case. So it's really difficult. And another one of my big pet peeve for younger that I get with my students is and you get to see in a lot of websites, center text. Center text is incredibly difficult to read because we, in our country and in general in the Western world, we read left to right. And so if the line don't start at the same point, it's a lot harder for us to actually read it through it. It's also really bad for accessibility for people with disability. So just center your text in the box, but keep it left aligned, because it will make it so much easier to read. And it's interesting that you see it everywhere. Every website, even really professional website, you see, center text. Now, for a headline, that's perfectly fine. But for a body copy, it makes it really, really difficult, really difficult to read. So that's another thing to add to the cognitive load. And again, the code is, you may think about, well, just a little bit. Sure, a little bit here, a little bit there, then it will make it, they all add up. So the idea is to make it as simple as possible. And the last thing you can do is apply empathy. Trying to remember, you are not your user. Your user, your customer did not design the website. They don't know it as well as you do. So try to empathize with them. And my favorite way to empathize is to ask somebody who doesn't know anything about UX or design to navigate a website. My husband is an engineer and he's very tech savvy, but I can tell you, when we're looking at websites together, for whatever reason, I'm a lot faster in finding what I'm looking for than he is. And this is because obviously I'm a web designer, so I know how web pages are done. And even he's really like tech savvy, is still struggling to find certain things. So if you have a friend that's not in the business or significant other, have them try your site even before you involve your customer, because you would have a very good understanding how difficult it is. And obviously, usability testing is the best way to find empathy, and the best way to show your boss or your CEO how much your customers struggle. If they're like trying to resist changes, show them how much they struggle with the existing design, and maybe that will convince them, because it's always important to understand that. Now, one thing you can do too, if you need to have almost like a checklist, is to use heuristics. Now, heuristics are basically a list of rules of thumbs, basically what ideas of what you should do. Now, there are no laws or anything, but they help you have kind of a checklist to look when you design your interfaces. Now, there's a lot of different ones. There's the Travis 247 guidelines, Don Norma's 6 principle, Wayne Shanks and Barker. The most popular ones is Jacob Nielsen 10 heuristics, which I'm showing here on the left side. That again, they're almost like little rules. So for example, the first one that they have is that make sure that visibility of system status, that basically says, make sure your customer and your user have feedback at all time. They know where they are, they know what page they're looking for, they know how to get back. So this is definitely important. The second one, it will be match between the system and the real world. That, remember how we are talking about mental model? So your design should conform to the mental model. Sometime I go to website that instead of using a shopping cart, they're using a shopping bag. Now, it could be okay as long as it's recognizable. So one thing you don't want to do is to have something that does not look like a shopping bag. And I'm sorry, but I have to say that Apple is a big offender on here too, because their shopping bag is basically a square with a half circle on top of it, which for me is fine because again, I look at website all the time, but it's going to be as fine for everybody else? Maybe not. Also, it talks about giving control and freedom to the customer so they can always go back. They're talking about consistency and standards. So that means, like we were talking about, use conventions. People are used to specific symbol. Don't be creative about it. This is the thing that make people feel in control. And then obviously trying to avoid errors by making your design easy. And notice that number 6 is recognition rather than recall. So we are in agreement there. May also, make it efficient to use and aesthetic and minimalistic design. And the number 1 and 10 is kind of the one that get ignored the most, which is recognize, diagnose, and recover from error and help in documentation. The reason they're ignored is because I'm sure that a lot of you had an error on a website or something like that, and have no idea what happened. In fact, I had to say I have the same exact experience this morning when we are trying to troubleshoot the Meet, and Zoom will tell me that I couldn't share, I wasn't permitted to share my screen. No experience why, all the settings seems correct. There was no explanation either what to do or why it failed. None. So that's a perfect example of what not to do, because an error or a mistake, it should tell you, 1, that there is an error, 2, what to do to go back on track, and ideally apologize and say, I'm sorry, this has happened, but this is how you can fix it. And I can tell you, if you ever seen like a really basic 404 error that just have this horrible like serif font that tell you 404 or error 500, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, and obviously going with error prevention is make sure that there is help. And that doesn't mean have tons and tons of description of instructions, but make sure it's available if somebody needs it. And make sure that if you asking me for a very weird information in a form, you explain me, okay, I need this because 1, 2, 3. And you're lucky you live in Europe, so you don't have as much of those worries as we do in the United States. But a lot of time there is way more data collected that's really necessary. So by explaining why you need a particular piece of information, that will make my life easier, right? Oops, sorry. So how do you know if you succeeded, if you did, everything right? So somebody said this, I cannot take credit for it, but somebody said that if your grandmother or your little kid can understand it, or if your drunk friend can understand your website, then most likely than not, you did it pretty well. So I'm not saying you had to get your friend drunk and then go look at the interfaces, but if you feel that everybody could understand it from the older customer to the younger customer, then probably you did a good job. And if you really want to sum it up, don't make them think. This is not only the title of a really, really awesome book from Steve Krug, but it is the reality. Don't make the user think. And for thinking is don't make them activate system too. That takes effort. So make sure you make it really simple, make sure you make it obvious, and make sure that the website works. Right. So if you have any questions, just let us know. And like Candace mentioned at the beginning, there is a discount for you. If you're interested in having me look at your site or give you an audit, you can receive 10% off with the code Candace10. And I'm sure she will share later on all of her channels. And this is how to get in touch with me. You can book a free consultation on tdagux.com, which is under construction, but you can book your consultation from there, or you can find me on LinkedIn. So if you have any question, just.
So I think we only have one other person here called Julia, or at least in the call. We have a couple watching online.
Okay.
Julia, do you want to unmute yourself and show your video? If not, that's also all right.
Okay, let me just stop sharing. Stop sharing.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Right.
There we go. Hey,
Hi.
Julia.
Hey,
Hi,
Julia.
can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yes.
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
How are
Hi.
you?
No, I just want to say thank you both to Tiziana and to Candace for organizing this, and it was very informative.
Oh, good.
I'm a beginner UX designer.
Oh, great.
I'm currently studying UX design for a university in The Hague University in the Netherlands.
Oh, very cool.
And so I'm in my final graduation project. So it was very cool for me to just pay attention to everything that you were saying so that I could just keep in mind everything for my final graduation project.
Yes.
It was very, very nice for me to think about.
Oh, good. And like I said, we're recording it. So if you ever need to go back and catch something else, you can definitely do that. And I'm always happy when younger designer listen to those kind of presentation, because then they start from the beginning with the right attitude. So one other thing a lot of time I recommend to my student is also, if you have time, just go through regular website you usually go to and really make a note about what you like and you don't like, especially what frustrates you, because it's easier to forget. Like if you ask me, I mean, I have tons of examples, but right now, if you ask me what was the most frustrating site you've seen, right on top of my head, I may not be able to remember it. But I do have a folder on my computer with a bunch of screenshots that say bad example, don't do this. So it definitely helps.
I will definitely add the applause book website to
it. Yes, you should. You should. In fact, I'm on the process. I'm working on a case study on it because I feel that is really horrible. And I'm gonna do a redesign of it. So I'll make sure that when I do, I will send it to Candace so she can post it how it there.
That would be really nice. I would really like to see how it turns out.
Yeah. I mean, obviously they're not gonna do it, but I like to do those kind of example it's very helpful both for me and my student to see like, okay, how can we fix this? It's great. We all know that it's horrible, but how can we fix this? So no, for sure. I will make sure I share it with Candace. So awesome.
Great. Regarding like consultations, I think it would be interesting for my boss, the internship that I'm doing, for her to have a consultation with you. So I'll definitely forward your contact to her.
Yes, for sure. And like I said, I always offer 30 minutes just talk for free. So if just explain what I do and what kind of thing, and see if she will be interested. But yes, you can definitely share the 10% off with your boss, and I'll be happy to help her out looking at her website. Yes.
All right.
Awesome.
Nice.
And if you ever want to contact me and you want me to look at something you're designing, just let me know. I'll be happy to. I like to mentor students. So yes.
Thank you. I'll connect with both of you on LinkedIn if that's all right.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Wonderful. Can I give you a tip about connecting to LinkedIn? Because that's another thing I tell my students they never do. If you ever want to connect with these people, with anybody, don't just click connect. Just go to the actual person and leave a message. So when before connecting, make sure you say, hey, I'm so-and-so, why I want to connect with you. Thank you. Because I get a lot of like connect requests. I mean, I know that you're going to ask, so that's fine. But I get a lot of connect from like past students. And honestly, it's like, I don't know who you are, why you want to be friend with me, right? So I always try to tell my student, they still don't do it, but I have hope for you. So
that's a good tip to keep in mind always.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
And
well, thank you for joining.
Tiziana also writes for the Ethical Design Network,
Mhm.
right?
Yes,
So,
I do for the blog. Mhm.
yeah, that's also quite interesting. Well, that's how I met you,
Right.
Tiziana. And yeah, you know, I think it's quite interesting for students to read different perspectives. I'd like, you know, we discussed using some examples of websites
Mhm.
to talk a little bit further if there weren't too many Q&As.
Right.
And so, yeah, I'd like to juxtapose design in focus and Tinder.
Mhm.
Tinder,
Right.
because I actually attended a conference where the person who created the app explained everything. So I think it's good to, you know, I have a little bit of an understanding about it to put them together. But there are sometimes conflicting truths,
Mhm.
you know, that I think if I could go back in time, I would tell myself there's never black and white. There's
Right.
always, you know, it's context and
Right.
situation plays a
Right.
big role. Yeah.
Right. An
So
audience too.
exactly, exactly. So you're studying in The Hague. Do you have a focus, or do you have any yeah, specific way that you want to go, a road or products, companies that you want to work with?
So right now I'm actually designing for an upcoming new yet another one social networking app.
Hey, we need more
Which,
because we don't want
yeah,
Twitter anymore.
why
So
not?
right.
It's never enough. No. But it's the way it will work, as you mentioned, sort of like when I describe it to people, they say, "Oh, so like Tinder, like a dating app," and I'm like, "No, no, not really. It's more for activities and
Oh, nice.
making friends and building connections through activities."
Awesome. Cool.
So I'm enjoying that. I think that's a whole lot of work to do. But as it's a graduation project, I had to go through UX research first, so I had to talk to a lot of people and get to know how they are meeting people right now and what
That's
is the problem if they're not meeting so many people,
right.
what is going on and what they would really want in an app like this. And that's part of the project that I really like, just talking to people
Nice.
and getting to know their
Yes.
needs and what their
That's
problems
great.
are.
Yeah. Yeah. You're gonna build it? Like program it?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's so
I'm
nice. That'd be
currently
awesome.
looking at it.
Oh, that's
Um,
cool. You
yeah.
already find a name?
So there is the company exists. It's called Bridge.
Bridge? Okay. Nice.
So it's like Bridge, we connect you. That's their
Oh, that's very cool.
their
Oh, I
name.
like it.
So
Make sure
yeah,
you
Well, if
interview people
you
afterwards too, so they can actually use the app before it's done,
yeah,
so that you can eliminate any issue.
yeah. I'm planning on
Tatiana,
carrying out tests.
I'm sorry, what?
Sorry.
you were saying, or you mentioned before, I put it on the website. You mentioned that if somebody wanted to do an evaluation of a website, we could maybe go through that. So I
Mhm.
don't know if that's something maybe you want to go with Bridge, to see sort of what Tiziana's feedback would be, or suggestions, or you know, ways of looking at the problem that she could advise you on. And what do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
fine
I
with it
think
if you want to. If
All
just
right, so can we give is it Julia?
yeah, Julia.
Julia.
Okay, such a strange spelling.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, a little bit
Okay.
different.
All right.
But
Tiziana,
anyway,
can we
just like a
give
normal.
Julia sharing a
Mhm.
You should be able
presentation?
to, because I make
I should be able
everybody
to.
able. Julia,
Ah,
can you
okay.
share your screen? Can you
Yeah,
check?
let me try. Right now, what I have is a Figma prototype
Okay, sure.
of
Well, you
of
want
the
to
app
test it
itself.
before you code it, so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's so far the app version, so it's not
Yeah, that's
the
fine.
website.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine.
Let me see. Zoom.
And don't feel on the spot. If you don't want to do it, that's fine.
No, I mean, it's always great to get feedback on. I was myself looking at, before this meeting, I was looking at each of the screens to see if I got the flow of it correctly.
Okay.
And now
Great.
I was trying to fix some things, but
See, that's
How-
my favorite part, designing the flows. But that's always fun.
What's my I think my favorite part of UX is sort of looking at the journeys.
Right, that's fun.
It's the flows as well, but it's sort of more like multi journey
Yes. Yes.
routes. I like that a lot.
Okay, that's cool. All right.
Right.
That's nice.
am I sharing the screen?
Yes, you
Yeah.
are. Yes, you are.
All right. So we have the login sign-in page, and then
So which one is
This
the
would-
first page?
it
Like
would
when
be
I
the
download it,
discover.
when I download the app, what would be the first page?
So the sign-in page, right? It will.
Okay. So
come
you
up
have
here.
that, we connect you. Okay. So my first recommendation before even looking at design is that you will give me at least one minimum information about what I'm looking at. Because when I download apps, sometimes I download similar apps just to see which one I like. So even just one sentence is like, what's Bridge? Before I decide if I want to log in or sign up. Right?
Yeah,
it's
you
like-
mentioned that. Yeah.
Right. Because it's like, why
The
would I
5
commit?
seconds.
Right, exactly. So it's like, I don't know what Bridge is, a beautiful logo, but I don't know what that is. So it can be just a sentence, connecting people. I don't know. I'm not a copywriter, but it can be just one sentence or, a people, like you said, is like for activities in general, right? So it
Yeah.
could be like even like a picture of people having fun together or something like that made me feel like, okay, I get it. I understand. I definitely want to do that. So don't
Yeah,
forget the
that's-
emotional part.
That's something I actually had initially in my design. I had in the background to this image sort of an image of people connecting as well.
Okay,
So
that's cool.
maybe I can get
All
back to
right.
it. And then this would be once you log in,
Okay.
this would be the starting page. So
Mhm.
I added that just now because I thought, when you log in, you have not joined any activities yet.
Perfect.
So you have
Perfect.
0 things on your profile on your dashboard.
No, that's great. It's important to
Yeah.
design empty states. Mhm.
So there's basically this, and then it will show the trending activities happening in your area.
Okay, that's great.
Search, you find activities that match you, and then it'll
Okay,
give you a catalog of the activities.
okay,
Once you find an activity that you like, for example, I have rock climbing as an
okay,
activity.
cool.
This is how you join,
Okay,
and you can pick different. This is a requirement from my
Right.
boss.
okay. No,
that
that's
you get
fine.
packages, but you join the activity.
Okay,
You have descriptions and once you join,
I think just what's really bothering me at the moment here, this discover and play buttons. I think they're too small, these CTAs on the last 2 pages.
Mhm.
Like it's fine on the other pages because there's a lot of content, but here
Mhm.
you really do have the space to really just make that a little bit more.
Mhm.
Yeah, I tend to go with buttons for apps with 42 pixels minimum when there's a lot of space, because it's just the size of the finger as well. When I look at this, it looks like it's maybe even under 30 pixels, the buttons,
right? You
and
said
that makes
42.
it a little bit.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You said 42, right?
Yeah, like if you go to the page just before these last 2, or even here below, hey friend, these buttons being that small is quite all right, because it's not really a CTA, a call to action. It's more like an action.
Okay.
While as the CTAs, it's nicer to make them pop, because then people know that you want them to interact with it. It's not just like choose something, but like, yeah, let's go discover.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you agree, Tiziana?
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah, there's
one thing
definitely the
about,
space for it.
yeah, one thing I will also consider about the button, because discover and pay look very similar. I would add a little icon so it's really obvious that people don't press pay by mistake. And because it's so similar to discover, so if you go through the different screen, you may be used to click on the orange button. So maybe having like the sign, like an icon for money or something like that right next to it, so it's pretty obvious that we're talking about financial transaction. I think it could help to avoid mistakes.
Great.
And then one thing too about hey friend at the bottom, like the confirmation, I will probably rewrite it a little bit, because I feel that yes and never mind are confusing, because they, are you sure you don't want it to attend? And then it's like, yes, that means that I am sure, or that means yes, I wanted to attend. So one thing maybe you would say like, hey friend, maybe something like, we're sorry you don't want it to attend, please confirm, or something like that. So that there is no confusion if it's like, does yes means I want to go, does yes means, do not want to go. So
Perfect.
that's one thing you may want to be careful about understanding.
Yeah.
Are you writing the copy as well for the app?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, and then one other thing, I don't know if I like when I say you have been chosen or you were chosen. I think accepted your invitation or something like that would be better. Chosen can be feeling like, oh, I bring you back. I don't know how it is in Europe, but like here that you get picked to play in a specific team. And so it kind of may feel like, oh, I wasn't chosen. Like I'm not good in, you know what I'm saying? It's, I feel chosen. It may be a little too strong of a term. Maybe there was a match, which is like something a little more generic versus like chosen. And I know maybe, go ahead.
I thought of having there's a match, but one thing that the owner of this app, she was really strict on it not being a matching app.
Right. So maybe it was like your invitation got accepted, or
you got a hit.
That. Huh?
You got a hit.
Yeah, you got a hit, something like that. So I think, so because then you explain what it is anyway, like if if you say something like that, you got a hit, someone wants to hang out with you. So it is pretty obvious that you explain what it is. So I think it would be kind of nice.
Right.
Also, again, for contrast, make sure that yellow, and it's hard to see from the screen, but like there was some, like orange is a really good contrast, orange and white. But when you have small text in yellow, that may be a little hard to read.
Yeah.
Do you know how to check your contrast? There's a very there's a website that makes it really easy. Do you know the website off your top of your head?
Oh, not on top of my head, but you can check for like color contrast checker.
Yeah.
That's, there are tons of them. And in fact, on websites in general, there is also like when you coding, it will tell you. And I'm surprised. I mean, I'm sure the Figma has a plugin for that.
Oh, yes, they do have a plugin actually.
I'm sure it is. Probably, I don't know if they have a full-on like accessibility plugin, but I'm sure there is a plugin for color contrast.
They have a plugin for everything.
I know, that's why I'm saying it. That's a pretty big one, so I'm pretty sure they have something like that. So, and sometimes it's just a question of changing a shade a little darker. Are you familiar with coolers?
Yeah.
You do the COLO. So, once you have your color palette, you can choose shades that are still within the hue. So then you feel like, oh, I really like this orange, but it needs to be slightly darker. You can choose like 1 tone darker or 2 tones darker, and you stay within the same hue. Do you know how to do that? Yeah.
Just like, yeah.
Well, the thing is, what's nice for you is that you also have in your logo the orange.
Right.
So you really use a little bit more color. I do like that the orange is used for the notifications, because that does pop. But like, for example, with the banner, you could bring that red in to attract the attention, while you keep the rest, you know, that is yellow, still yellow, because it's still prominent. But really at specific locations, like when there is an announcement, maybe bring in that red, that orange, and even a gradient. Gradients is going to keep staying hot for the next couple of years. You know, it's one of those design trends that's just continuing, and people are just, please never stop, we love it.
It looks like you have some subtle when you say people want to join you. Isn't that a gradient? So
it is a little bit.
Yeah, so maybe you can do one grade a little darker, but I like that. I like subtle personally. So I think it's kind of nice that it works that way. So upcoming activity, this is a really small thing, but when you have upcoming activity, I think I would like to see the round corner, both top and bottom. Because it feels like when you have more than one, you start seeing orange before you see white, you know, like the figure ground Gestalt principle. So I want to focus on the white, not on the orange. And now all I can see is like the shape of the orange instead of like the around the corner. It's a really small thing, but I think it's better. Oh, it looks nice overall. I think he's, you know, there's little things, but nothing major. Don't center the text. I told you, everybody center text, but especially when you have like in the bio, like Martin I don't know how to pronounce that. So I will keep it right aligned. So
center text is fine for banners and like single sentences, or, you know, like short sentences. But whenever there's more than 3 lines, more than when there are like with the profiles, there are definitely the one on the left is better. It's all to the right. It's easier to read, while as this one is you know, to the right is just more difficult, because it is
and you can adjust
too much text.
You can adjust the width so that up can go to the next line, and maybe heart pumping can be together. So you can definitely adjust that even when you program it, you can kind of adjust that. So, but I personally, if you look at the two, I really think it looks easier to read, the one under Martin. So
I actually like it also more.
Right. So and this is what I was talking about, like contrast, like that yellow and white. So I will go more on the orange if you want to read it. And then, for example, like in the questions, the question underneath can be centered, but the response, I will put it right aligned. Especially because you have an A anyway, so it gives you a line that you can align it to. So I think, you know, it will read better. And then the question itself can be centered, maybe a little bit less space, but other than that, I think it will look better.
All right.
And you know, maybe with a Q as well, so that people can say QA. That sort of makes a lot more sense, because, you know, if you're just skimming, what's A? You know, it's got no it's not related to anything. So a little Q, a little A. You know, maybe the Q in gray, and then that A calling attention, like, we've got the answer.
And it can be smaller. It doesn't have to be as big as A, because A obviously is more crucial. But
All right. And then finally, it's their chat.
The chat. That's fine. And again, make sure the contrast, but other than that, it's fine. And don't do the same thing that Apple does to change colors depending on the phone, because that's really driving me nuts. Because I have an Android. I'm a Mac person, but I have an Android phone, and it's so annoying. Here is like, I don't remember what color bubble is not iPhone. I think it's green when you're not an iPhone and blue when you're an iPhone, something like that. I was like, you got the green bubble. So, So
Yeah, I also dislike that. I also have an Android phone, and my friends who do have an Apple, they always tell me like,
I know it's
oh,
so
I got a green. Oh,
annoying.
I know it's from you.
I know it's really annoying, especially because both my husband and my son have iPhones, and so every time they make fun of me, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
whatever, and like, and my son is like, I tried to FaceTime you. I'm like, I don't have a phone that let me FaceTime you. I can answer your call. I'm not gonna FaceTime because I don't have FaceTime. So,
Yes, that's another thing.
yes,
So,
yes,
Julia,
Yeah.
can you
yeah.
walk me through why, the messaging part, you've got the chat on the
Mhm,
with all the profiles, and then you've got the actual chat.
mhm.
So in the one your icon is yellow and the other it's orange.
Right.
So there's a little bit of orange from the logo and the search icon and from the notification icon buttons. And
Mhm.
then you get to the search and it's almost entirely orange. So it feels a little bit disbalanced. Did you do that with an intention?
No, no. This is still the
Playing around.
testing of the colors, the
Okay.
wireframes that
Okay,
I
that's
tested, and
great.
now I'm changing it more so it looks more smooth and
Okay.
Yeah.
consistent.
So
Yeah.
what is
Icons should always be the same color, right?
right? Mhm.
Yeah.
Unless it's like different, you know, like if you've got an app with different
Right.
functions, then you can sort of change that to show the differences between the different functions. But if you're in the same, like this is messaging, you're intending to message, so you're looking at the people and you're going to the message. So keep the icons consistent.
Mm-hmm. And maybe
Yeah.
the plus can be different than the rest of the icons so that you see it right away. I know it's bigger, but maybe that one is a darker color or lighter color. And I have a question for you. What is the last icon on the right?
Oh, these this one
Yeah.
is just a space saved that I saved on the app
Okay.
for my specific graduation project on
Oh,
set.
okay. Okay. So, okay. No, I just wondering because I was like, what is that? And this is
Yeah.
another advice that I always recommend when you're doing usability testing before even showing the app. If you have a bunch of icons that they're not familiar, like the rest of the icon are pretty common, but if there is something that's not familiar, I always have my student asking the testers, like, what do you think this icon do? So before even showing the app, so they don't have a chance to interact with it. So so ask them, can you tell what this is? If you show me a little text bubble, I'm probably gonna say, I think that's a message, because
Yeah.
obviously it's pretty obvious. But when you have something different, also be careful with the like, if you have like or favorite, because there, at least here, there are two different ways to do it, either heart or I think a dot or something like that. So whatever convention you decide to use, I always like to test it just to make sure that is like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, make perfect sense. So just a little tip that I know this a lot of young designers don't think about it, but icon can be really crucial because yes, I can
Mm.
learn it, but ideally you don't have to because it's
No.
obvious, right? But yeah,
Perfect.
no, it's exciting. I can't wait to see it
Yeah.
when it's done.
I
Thank
like
you
the
so much.
colors. I
Yeah.
like the colors. I think, the way that you used your light grays is a perfect, you hit the right tone for the yellow and the
Right.
orange. Or
Right.
I think does it stop at the orange or does it go into red? It looks a little bit red on my screen. So I see yellow, orange, red in the logo.
Yeah.
It's
Seems
the
like
in the
logo.
see,
logo.
I see orange, so it depends on probably on the screen.
Yeah.
There is
Oh yeah. So
You
it
see better
goes
than
to
me.
red. Yeah.
And yeah, and
Yeah.
gray and the gray and white also need to be tested because again, depending on the screen, especially if you're outside, the gray may disappear. Now
Yeah.
it may not be a problem, but I think at least for the text messages, it probably will be important to have a color that can be seen instead of just have floating text. But just keep that in mind to test it on different phones and on different conditions, because gray especially is difficult sometimes. And there are different screens, so you may want to test it. So,
All right.
Now, Tiziana, you're gonna probably hate me.
oh, what?
And you know, it's not something I believe in, but it is a factor that exists. So, you know, brand communication isn't always about pleasing people.
Right.
So,
No, it's
like
true. I agree.
Tiziana mentioned about Apple,
Mhm.
they
Yes.
they created Steve Jobs, right? So they made
Right.
UX visible. So
Right.
why does that exist? It's intentional. Sometimes
Right.
you want, you know, you want to evoke certain brands to evoke certain emotions
Right.
because people become invested when they get emotional. So,
Right.
you know, I
Right.
don't advocate for abuse of emotion or
No,
perception.
for sure. For sure.
Yeah,
So,
but the brand,
oh no, I
the
believe that. I do believe that. The only thing, so let me show you what I mean, because it's like it may be harder to see.
yeah.
So let me, sorry, I'm gonna have to stop.
But what I also want from you, Tiziana, is sort of like, you know, if we could sort of talk about the psychology behind that, and you know, how
Yes.
could you,
Behind,
how can UX bring more UX principles into that and sort of,
okay.
yeah,
Well,
if you have
yes.
anything that is.
Well, one thing I love, like one thing that Apple does amazingly well, and that's the whole psychology part that you're talking about, is like to evoke feelings. So again, I love their website, but if you look at, compared to, let me see if you can see on the bottom. No, this is what I don't like that navigation part. That is like, you know, it's slightly better now, but it's a light gray when it could totally be white.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like if I change the color, I'll show you the difference. Let me see, color, where's the color? Sorry. Let's see if I can.
I think that could work if you had like for example a banner, you know, but in the
Right,
navigation you really do
right.
want, like
Let me see.
Tiziana said, you really do want that high contrast. If you're, of course, you
Right.
wanting to be user friendly.
Sure. Let me see if you change it. No. But anyway, so, but I think this is so close to white. See, look at that when I mouse over. See how close it is? So it's not that you notice a big difference, but it does read a lot better. So it's like, why couldn't it be white to begin with? Like swap, like white to begin with, and then make it there. But if you go through their website, it's all about emotions. Because again, if you look at it, it doesn't really talk about their, you know, AirPods. It doesn't say we're the best earbuds ever. It just says share the joy. So it doesn't tell you the feature necessarily. It just tell you what's gonna happen. It's like, oh, you get AirPods, you'll be happy and you're gonna do all sort of fun stuff. Here's like, watch a healthy leap ahead. Once again, everybody wants to be happy and healthy, right? Or the other thing about the watch, adventure awaits. This is all about provoking some kind of emotion. Because if you simply tell me how great that watch is, it doesn't matter. You know, I mean, sure, that's great. So, but notice the difference between HomePod Mini, which is really cute and lovely, versus Adventure Awaits. See how much more persuasive Adventure Awaits versus like, okay, those are cute little round balls. So Apple does that incredibly well. And there was
And
actually,
also the reason why those two are next to each other is that they're not just talking to one person, they're talking to different, you know, because the homemaker is not the same who wants to go on adventures. You know, I'm a mom. I don't want adventures in my house. I want adventures on holiday maybe, but not in my house. And so they target different people through evoking different emotions.
Definitely.
So,
but how about say something for the HomePod Mini is like bring in the cheer. You know what I'm saying? It's like you don't have to talk about venture, but maybe you could just say like when I bring this in, I bring happiness or cheer or something like that. But another thing they do amazingly well, they use rhymes and or semi-rhymes, like is wow or never, which rhymes with the the expression is now or ever. So this is amazing because we remember rhymes really well for some random reason. So this is definitely attract attention. Is wow or never. I'm like, wow, that's really clever. So, you know, and again, I think they do, you know, the other thing they do a lot is they using those sentence fragments. That's, I mean, I think that's what it's called. But let's say, hi Pat, lovable, drawable, magical. Like there is not even a verb, but he totally capture what they mean. So, you know, and I just bought a new iPad, so I'm a little biased about that. But, you know, everything they say is all about the amazingly stuff that you can do. All screen, all colorful, jot it down, type it up. So they are incredibly good at this. So, you know, and again, if there is one company that brings in emotions into their product is Apple. So they very rarely, and in fact, there is a talk from Steve Jobs from the when he came back to Apple in the late 90s. He actually said that it's not about how well, at that time they were just doing computers, like it's not about megabytes, it's not about how well we can do the feature, is the idea behind it. What does that mean to own a Mac? It doesn't mean like, oh, you know, my Mac is better than your PC. Is like, what does it mean to be a Mac owner? What does it mean to be Apple person?
Yeah.
So I think they
Yeah,
do
I think
exceptional.
another very famous idea that circulates frequently is, you know, Apple doesn't sell a computer, it sells a lifestyle.
Correct.
Ah,
Correct. Yes.
what is it? There's a whole list, you know, they don't sell cola, they sell
Right.
you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
lifestyle.
yeah, yeah.
Or they, you know, sell ego, or they sell
Right, right, right,
status.
right. Oh yeah,
It's
totally.
yeah, yeah.
Totally. If you
So
think about Disney is about family entertainment. You know, if you
yeah,
think about, and even Steve Jobs mentioned Nike. Nike doesn't
yeah,
just sell sports stuff, it sells athletes, and you know, you too can do it. And yeah,
mhm,
so the best company, they're still doing that. They don't sell feature, they sell benefits. How you gonna
yeah,
be after having their product? How you gonna feel, like what image you're gonna project?
mhm,
So
yeah,
yeah, definitely, definitely. That's the only way to really sell, because right now information doesn't really, you know, that's great. There's so many products, they're similar. And for as diehard of an Apple person I am, they're definitely, you know, PCs are as good. If you think about computer, I still would never buy a PC just as my main computer. I just wouldn't.
mhm,
And there is no rational reason behind it. You know,
yeah.
I just love Macs.
Well,
So
it's also like sort of, I think, you know, around about, I can't remember, like I think 2000s, you know, they really, what, you know, before computers were always very tech. It was the
right,
nerds and the
right,
clever people and the
right,
accountants, and
right,
you know, and then Apple bridged that divide. They
right,
made it, especially, you know, the way that they played Steve Jobs was
right,
all this publicity to say, to speak to the creatives, to speak
right,
to, you
right,
know, people. And I think generally it is perceived, I don't know if it's completely true, but generally people who are creative are perceived more emotional.
right,
And so, you know, I think that's why a lot of designers, especially those who were either studying or at the
right,
prime during the 2000s, are heavily drawn to Apple.
right.
I was a nerd. I wasn't a cool kid, so I've mainly stayed with non-Apple products my entire life. But now, you know, recently I read that Apple is making a whole lot of changes
Mhm.
for the user, in favor
Right,
of the user, not collecting your data, not allowing
right, right,
companies to record, and
right,
so. And now I'm considering Apple, you know, because it's
right,
serving my needs. But yeah, you know, it isn't just like it's you have to look at where you are now,
right.
what is the environment, and what
Mhm.
is the different communications happening, the narratives
Right.
that most people hear, because, you know, even though there are lots of companies and lots of things happening, we still hear mainly certain narratives,
Yes.
you know, because
Yes.
this is the fashion, this is the trend. So
Right.
listen to the narratives and then play into that narrative and make it appeal on some level to what people identify with. Like,
Right.
you know, almost every designer I know is an Apple freak, and especially those who used Apple, or, you know, started using Apple at the same time
Right.
when they started marketing to creatives,
Right.
and
Right.
made it less about the nerds and more about
Right.
the
But
creatives.
also keep in mind that Steve Jobs studied typography and design. And so
Yeah.
one of his early focus, even with the first Macintosh, it was to make it like really focus on design, which I think
Mhm.
originally that's what kind of attracted creative, because he cared about it so much, about the visual
Mhm.
element, and then he kind of snowballed from there. So it's kind of nice to feel like, well, he was a designer in a way. So he already
Yeah.
knew how to appreciate good design, and he was the first one that cared about the user interface design compared to, you know, PC, that even now, obviously, I think visually speaking, the system like OS versus Windows 10, there is no comparison. Look, you know, visually, but
Yeah. I mean, I think there are certain things that I dislike about Steve Jobs as well,
sure.
but I do, you know, with the Apple, I remember when I was at school, there was all this stuff because it was a bit apple, and
Right.
that symbolized the Garden of Eden, and it was released on the 6th of June 1996, and it was all
Right.
this satanic symbology.
Oh,
So I remember before I even worked on a computer, I didn't know anything about computers. I just knew about Apple, the bit Apple and 666. And
right.
then, of course, when I grew up and I studied multimedia, then I still worked on Windows because that was mostly accessible
Right.
in South Africa at that time. You know, most colleges used
Right.
those equipment. So you know, but definitely since the late 2000s, more and more Apple has been introduced to marketing teams, to design teams,
Right.
to the creatives.
Right. Even coder, a lot of people that do web development now move to Apple, which it was something unheard of, that like a developer would actually move to Apple. So now a lot of them using Apple. So it's interesting.
Yeah,
So
yeah. It's fun to be a designer. It's
right.
also sometimes complicated.
It is.
Yeah, and there's lots of opinions, there's lots of ideas.
Right.
You know, you can speak to Tiziana, you can speak to me, and you can speak to somebody else, and they will all tell you a different story.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, research, you know,
Right.
research and analysis goes a long way.
Right.
I think wasting too much time accumulating nonsense data is a waste, but
Right.
collect as much data as you can, relevant data.
Right.
Emphasize, as Tiziana said, it's quite important, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually talk to people.
Yeah.
What an idea, huh? So
Yeah.
yes, for sure. For
Pretty
sure.
cool. And yeah, I think
Our time.
well, I don't know if anybody's coming to the live event in Amsterdam. Nobody responded saying that they're going. So I think we could continue this session if you guys are open for it, or is it sort of?
I have a few more, like about another 20 minutes, and then I have to come off. But yeah,
Yeah.
I can be open. And if Julie have any question or anything you would like to know, ask us. Definitely are open.
Yeah.
Otherwise you can fill up.
Yeah. Well, I thought, you know, like I was talking about Tinder earlier, and then Julia mentioned it again.
Right.
I think what's interesting is how, you know, what was his name? I forget his name. It was so long ago. Such a nice guy as well. Oh, gosh. Yeah, I hope he doesn't watch this. Anyway, he was talking about how much goes beneath the bonnet. You know, Tinder, you have so few interactions, but to get to that stage, they went through processes over,
Right.
they redefined, tried and looked from different lenses, just what can you throw away? What can you throw away? What can you throw away? Because especially with like, for example, Meetup, Tinder, all of these apps where you have a specific task that you want to accomplish, really minimalism is the way forward. And, you know, I think I can sort of see the influences of those apps a little bit in what you've designed. And well, I think you've done quite a good job so far. There was very little feedback. I'm a person who loves color, so and not everybody agrees.
I don't know. I honestly, orange is one of my favorite colors, but I don't wear bright colors. So I love bright colors, but I don't wear them. I just like to look at them. So, but yeah, I have orange everywhere in my house.
So, yeah, regarding the colors, I did a test. So I had a little prototype, and I asked people what they thought of the colors, and first I asked what colors they thought of when they thought of the word friendship or the meaning of friendship. So
that's a
yellow
great way to do it. Yeah, no, that's a good way to do it. And like, I mean, for me, living in California, you see a lot of like orange, yellow kind of color when you identify to the city or things like that. Even I think the logo of our city is like a yellow, orange, and blue. I think, I don't know. They redesigned it recently. Actually, it's really pretty logo. So yeah, and I think obviously when you think about friendship and love, is always like warm colors, not cold colors. So I think that was a great choice for sure. So it's nice that you actually tested out first, which is kind of nice. So
thank you.
One problem.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Julia.
No, go ahead.
No, please. That would change the topic. So
okay.
Yeah, now I was just wondering, you know, when you showed us the prototype, usually what I do is I make a couple of flows, and then I can just press play and sort of show people instead of navigate, because that's also just it just makes it feel like, for example, if you change the background to a blue, then those colors will really pop, and we'll be able to look at the screen specifically that you're presenting. So that's just a small.
Right. Yeah. No. And then one thing, I call it a problem, but it's a thing that I noticed when I was looking at how Tinder and Bumble and all these social or dating, I guess, apps work. And one problem that I think that this app will face is how to make the users stay on that app instead of sharing their numbers and moving, or social media like Instagram, and moving on to that instead. Because when I talk to most people on Tinder, they share their numbers, they share their Instagram, and then they leave, or Bumble as well. And whenever there's a meeting that happens, they exchange numbers and then they go to WhatsApp. So that's an issue that's been bugging my head a little bit, and I was wondering if I could fix it.
I mean, you can't stop people from sharing contact information. But on the other hand, there's like, if you think about LinkedIn messaging, so unless you share particular things, all the messaging happen in LinkedIn. So so that could be a way in which is, you know, maybe you can caution. It's like, well, I mean, you have to share a number at some point, because otherwise you can't meet. But like maybe even something like a little psychology, as in like, be careful not to share your number, blah, 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 you know, something like that, that would like discourage communication. But I don't think you can stop it completely, because, and I don't know if it's really necessary, as in like, if, you know, you can have, if they have a good experience, I think, with that particular event, then they will be more likely to come back. But even then, you have no control over it. So, but unless you have some kind of moderator, one other way you can do that is like having some kind of, but even then it's kind of tricky to have like some kind of feedback after the event. It's like, how was the event? How was the person? There's always a chance that somebody will be like revengeful, and I'm like, you know, something like that. So that would be kind of that. Also make it clear it's not a dating app. So you know, you don't want to say this is not a dating app, but you know, explain what's the purpose of it, what we're trying to do. This is, you know, something like that. It could probably help. So, and explain why the reason of this happen. You can have it even on, you know, if you have a website advertising the app, that's can be very specific. Explain as like, oh, sometimes it's hard to find things in your area or people to do it with. And the idea is that you can find people to do whatever event you wanted to do.
So Tiziana was talking about focus. You know, when we focus, we ignore a lot of things. And you know, most of the time, like with the app that you're designing, it's got a specific goal. It's goal orientated, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of ignoring, for example, of communication. It lacks that complexity. So I think the way to sort of maybe get people to stay a little bit longer is to steal a little bit from Facebook. So you have the main app with its functions, but then the messaging app is separate because and it can stay open, you know. So I personally find it annoying that my WhatsApp and my Facebook icons, you know, I've got to drag them into the X. But you know, on days when I'm talking to a lot of people, that's super convenient because I don't have to, you know, switch. And I think maybe that's an area for you to go into.
Right.
Sorry.
That could be, that's okay. Yeah, that could be a definite thing. It's just, as I say, I feel that you can't control more than a certain amount for the messaging part. But what you can control, I find it like, how can we keep the app fresh? And so that people want to go back, regardless of the messaging. So those are kind of things, you know, for example, and I don't know how easy it is, but like have some kind of verified events, as in like, you know, find a way of like, I know other people did that before or whatever. Maybe even organize, you know, maybe every quarter there is a bridge event, you know, in which is like, for some reason, you guys organize the event for, you know, something like that, or, you know, something that in case, just to get the ball rolling of having some kind of event and having something that changes so people want to come back. And I was like, oh, I want to see what's, you know, new there. Or, and eventually, I mean, you could even monetize it by collaborating with different companies. So they will offer discounts or, you know, like something like that. So that could be, you know, in the future, but that could be a way to like every day a different company or a different event has a special deal or whatever. Because I think, you know, it would be kind of impossible to monitor the messaging part. Like you can encourage it, but it's like I can't stop you from like exchanging phone numbers, you know. So definitely, that's for sure. It's not an easy thing. Do you guys have a launch date or like for the final thing or no?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
So this is sort of the second version of the app that I'm building. Initially, they were just defining a few things, but it was very, very vague. Even who the app was going to be for.
Right.
So that's what I did in the beginning. We defined who the users were.
Okay.
So it's still in very much the beginning phase of the app.
Right. So, and a couple of things also as you're doing it, you may want to consider some of the obstacles or the difficulties. So one, it would be the obviously age issue, as in like, you know, you probably want to find a way having like at least age ranges so that like, you know, if you're 19, you don't necessarily want to hang out with somebody who's like 55. So that will be something you may want to consider. Another thing, maybe you want to consider to like filter by gender. I know gender is such a weird thing, but like maybe you don't want to, again, hang out with people of different sex or something like that, or you worry about becoming a dating thing instead of an event. So those are some of the and I don't know if you how much research is with your audience already done, but you want to figure it out, what will be your concern about using something like that. So like, for example, it's like some people may say, oh, I feel uncomfortable meeting people that I don't know who they are. So maybe there is a way to kind of do like verify user or something like that. So like Twitter used to be. So, but something like that. So it's like, as much as what I can offer, also you want to consider is like, what are the obstacles that people that will stop people from using the app? What are the things that they're not happy? Even by comparing, as I say, I don't know how much research you guys done, but like even say, okay, what don't you like about Tinder? What don't you like about whatever other social app? So you have an idea about what makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I think.
And I don't know, maybe Tiziana said it while I went to clear my throat. I don't know, I had a cat hair or something in it. Archetypes is a good way to also approach the problem from different perspectives.
Right.
There's quite a lot of information. I've got this book by Jung. Jung is a psychologist who did quite a lot of work in this field, and he basically created 12 archetypes. But there are more modern archetypes. I had a very interesting report around about 2016. I can see if I can find it, but this was also the types of architects within millennials. So the foodie, the traveler. I think, of course, you can reach them like the baking event or the travel event, so filtering between, there are 6 main archetypes for millennials, and in a truly marketing sense. But having, you don't have to stick to it as a law, but having those understandings under, the information can help guide you to make certain amendments or add certain features or remove certain.
Yeah, and it can also, push you to interview the right people. That's also important to see, is like, well, we mainly focus on those particular archetypes. That's the people we need to talk to. Because of course you're designing for a specific, what is your target audience, generally speaking, do you know? So do you know who you're designing for? Like, who's your target right now?
Yes, so young adults who have, they're not university students, so they have recently graduated.
Okay. So
because
like 25?
Yes.
Okay.
So 25 plus year olds.
Okay.
Who fall into the category of like young, they're just starting their lives or.
Okay. Yes.
And we also mentioned expats.
Yes.
Who have just moved to a new city, or they don't really know that many people. They started a new job, but they haven't really adapted yet.
Right.
So they want to keep doing the activity that they were doing back home.
Right.
I've been here for 10 years and I still go to meetups, events. So not just when you arrive, it's
Yeah.
No, for sure. So I'm assuming you're gonna launch in one city first and then kind of spread out. Okay. So that's great, because that's a great way to see like the response on that. So that would be definitely something fun to do. So
sorry, Candice, what was the book that you just mentioned?
I've got 2. I've got Jung and Sarah, and I've got the archetypes and the collective subconscious. But that's a little bit different. Well, there is a book which is just the archetypes. So it's I think it's called The Archetypes by Jung, and then he talks a little bit about the archetypes, the Jung and the tarot. So he uses the tarot to explain the archetypes in a way that's cool, easily processable and rememberable. But yeah, this is just Jung. There are more relevant content for us right now. Like I said, I'll look for that link and I'll share it with you. There are 6 with millennials and Gen Z.
Right.
And, you know, this is from, of course, the marketing business lens. So
Right.
I remember the one was the foodie, the one was the traveler, one was the nerd. So it's basically just sort of like, you know, since the 90s, it started in the 80s, but since the 90s, it was really pushed, this narrative of identity and, you know, so you had the goths and you had the punks, and, you know, and so that helped create more, more copy paste people.
Right.
You know, I'm a designer, so I've got to use Mac, or I'm a foodie, so I've got to always talk about pizza because Italian food is the best. I don't know. It's these sort of associations that you have with the identity of the peer group that you associate with. And yeah, it can be quite extensive and broad, but you can also sort of siphon that into very specific types. Because yeah, it's I think one thing, if we didn't speak with you, Julia, today, I was thinking of maybe talking about complexity with Tiziana, comparing Tinder and excuse me, and design in focus, because Tinder is single girl orientated, so it's very simple, it's very while as design in focus, by the way, is my platform. So design in focus is more heavy on the brain. It's supposed to stimulate thinking. It's supposed to be, you know, just a little bit more complex. So, you know, we don't have time to discuss that now, but some products like what you have is more simplified and some are more complex. And that, you know, depending on what the objectives are is really how you design, right? Like we were talking about something earlier, Tiziana, and I can't remember, but you would think something is right, but then you find it's not. It's just being relevant at the relevant time, I would say. Right.
Yeah. So that's why important to know who you're designing for, if there is a need. And that's why I'm assuming you guys gonna do some testing before launching, like with your prototype. So that definitely gonna help you a lot to see if it's like, A, there is a demand, and two is like, okay, am I really hitting what I need to be hitting? So well, just keep us posted. I definitely would love to see the progress. So
yes, thank you so much for all the feedback and all the tips.
At any time.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you for joining. So I will stop